The stains on the envelope weren't spilled wine. They were rust-brown and flaking onto Beatrice's trembling fingers. She knew the letter held the power to topple Boston's most feared crime family. Hiding it beneath her pillow was a desperate mistake, especially when the Mafia Boss himself came to share her bed. Beatrice Gallagher was not the kind of woman who attracted danger. At 32, she was a fat, quiet baker, living in the cramped apartment above Gallagher's Suites in Boston's North End. She was acutely aware of her size in a world that demanded women take up as little space as possible. B, however, was soft curves, thick thighs, and a generous heart moving through her bakery with a heavy, rhythmic grace. She lived a life defined by the smell of vanilla extract, rising dough, and the predictable quiet of early mornings, until the night Joey Russo bled to death on her linoleum floor. It was a Tuesday. A nor'easter was battering the Massachusetts coast, rattling the old sash windows of Bee's kitchen. She had been frosting a batch of red velvet cupcakes when the back alley door, the one with the notoriously faulty lock, crashed open. Joey stumbled in, bringing the freezing rain and the sharp, metallic stench of fresh blood with him. He was a low-level runner for the Romano family, a kid Bea occasionally gave day-old bagels to. Tonight, his face was the color of wet ash. He collapsed against the stainless steel prep table, sliding down to the floor and leaving a thick, gruesome smear of crimson in his wake. "Joey!" Bea dropped her spatula, her heavy footsteps thudding against the floorboards as she rushed to his side. She fell to her knees, disregarding the blood soaking into her jeans. "Oh my God, Joey, let me call an ambulance." "No," he gasped, his bloody fingers digging into the fleshy part of her forearm with terrifying strength. "No cops, no docs. They'll finish it." "Who? Joey, you're dying!" Bea cried, her chest heaving as panic seized her throat. With a shaking, blood-slicked hand, Joey reached into the inside pocket of his ruined leather jacket. He pulled out a folded, heavy stock envelope. The edges were already soaking up his blood, turning a dark, muddy brown. "Give this to Arthur," Joey wheezed, his eyes rolling back. "Only Arthur. Trust nobody else. Christopher. Christopher is a rat. He's gonna kill the boss." "Joey, I don't know any Arthur," Bea lied, though everyone in the North End knew exactly who Arthur Romano was. He was the ghost that haunted the neighborhood, the undisputed head of the Romano syndicate. "Under the pillow," Joey mumbled, his grip on her arm going slack. "Keep it hidden. Give it. Only to." His chest stopped moving. The kitchen was suddenly plunged into an unbearable, deafening silence, save for the howling wind outside. Bea sat frozen on the floor, the blood-stained envelope clutched in her trembling hands. She stared at the thick, scrawled handwriting on the front. A. Romano. Eyes only. Panic, cold and sharp, finally broke through her shock. She couldn't call the police. If Christopher, Arthur's notoriously brutal underboss, Christopher Gable, was a traitor, the cops might be on his payroll. If she handed it to the wrong person, she'd end up exactly like Joey. Trembling, she pushed herself up from the floor. She ran up the back stairs to her small apartment, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Where do you hide a death warrant? Her jewelry box? Too obvious. A book? Too risky. Remembering Joey's delirious final words, under the pillow, she shoved the bloody envelope deep inside her pillowcase, pressing it flat against the foam, against the hall. She had just returned to the bakery, a bucket of bleach and a mop in hand, when the heavy, rhythmic thud of a fist hammered against the front door. Bea froze. Through the frosted glass, the imposing silhouettes of 3 men loomed in the streetlights. She cracked the door open. The security chain pulled taut. Standing on the other side, shivering off the rain, was Arthur Romano. He was a man who commanded the very air around him. Tall, broad-shouldered, and possessing a face that was both aristocratically handsome and brutally scarred along the jawline. Arthur looked like a fallen king, his dark eyes locked onto Bea, missing nothing. Not her disheveled hair, not her wide, terrified eyes, and certainly not the faint tremor in her hands. "Miss Gallagher," Arthur said. His voice was a low, resonant rumble that seemed to vibrate in Bea's chest. "I apologize for the late intrusion. I'm looking for a boy, Joey Russo." I haven't seen him," Bea stammered, hyper-aware of the faint smell of bleach clinging to her clothes. "We're closed, Mr. Romano." Arthur's gaze slowly dragged down her figure. Bea reflexively crossed her arms over her generous stomach, a habitual gesture of defense. But Arthur didn't look at her with the familiar dismissal she was used to from men. His eyes were heavy, dark, and predatory. He looked at her as if she were a sudden, fascinating puzzle. "You're shaking, Beatrice," he noted softly, stepping closer to the door. "And you smell like Clorox. At 2 in the morning. I like to keep a clean kitchen," she fired back, surprising herself with her own defiance. A ghost of a smirk touched Arthur's lips. "May we come in?" "No," she said firmly. "I'm alone, and it's late." Arthur stared at her for a long, agonizing moment. The 2 massive enforcers behind him shifted, ready to rip the door off its hinges at a single nod from their boss. But Arthur just raised a gloved hand, stalling them. "Have a good night, Beatrice," Arthur murmured. "Lock your doors. It's a dangerous city tonight." As they walked away, Bea shut the door and bolted it, her knees finally giving out. She slid to the floor, wrapping her thick arms around herself. Upstairs, beneath her pillow, the bloody letter waited like a ticking bomb. Over the next 2 weeks, Arthur Romano invaded Bea's life with a quiet, terrifying inevitability. Joey's body had magically vanished from her alleyway before dawn the next day, undoubtedly Arthur's men cleaning up the mess. But Arthur hadn't stopped coming around. At first it was subtle. 2 of his men, massive guys in tailored suits, began drinking coffee at her corner table every morning. Then Arthur himself started dropping by just as she closed the shop. He never directly accused her of knowing what happened to Joey. Instead, he sat at the counter, eating her cherry turnovers, watching her with those dark, unreadable eyes while she cleaned. Bea was terrified, but to her profound shame, she was also captivated. No man had ever looked at her the way Arthur did. Society had taught her that her fat body made her invisible, or at best, an object of polite pity. But Arthur's gaze was a physical weight. When she reached up to wipe down the high shelves, her shirt riding up to expose the soft, pale curve of her hip, she could feel his eyes tracking the movement. When she tasted a batch of frosting, licking the excess from her thumb, his pupils would dilate, the air between them growing thick and heavy. "You work too hard, Bea," Arthur said one evening, his voice slicing through the quiet hum of the refrigerators. "Idle hands are the devil's workshop," she replied, without turning around, furiously scrubbing a clean baking sheet. "I run the devil's workshop," Arthur countered smoothly, standing up. He walked over to the counter, his imposing frame dwarfing the space. He reached out, his large, scarred hand gently wrapping around her thick wrist, halting her frantic scrubbing. The warmth of his skin sent a violent jolt of electricity straight to her core. "I know he was here, Bea," Arthur said softly, stepping into her personal space. He smelled of rain, expensive tobacco, and danger. I know Joey came here before he disappeared. Bee's heart hammered against her ribs. Tell him, her mind screamed. Tell him about the letter. Tell him Christopher is going to betray him. But the words caught in her throat. What if the letter was a fake? What if Arthur killed the messenger? She had watched enough mob movies to know that civilians who knew too much didn't live to see old age. I don't know anything, Arthur, she whispered, looking down at his hand on her wrist. Arthur's thumb lazily stroked the soft skin of her inner arm. You're a terrible liar, Beatrice, but you have a beautiful heart. I'll wait until you're ready to tell me. The tension finally snapped 3 days later. Bee was working the register when Christopher Gable walked in. He was a sharp-featured man with dead, reptilian eyes. Unlike Arthur, who possessed a certain dark nobility, Christopher radiated pure malice. Miss Gallagher, Christopher said, leaning over the glass display case. I hear you were friendly with young Joey Russo. Bee forced a pleasant customer service smile, though her blood ran cold. He liked the bagels. Are you a friend of his? Something like that, Christopher sneered, his eyes darting around the bakery. Did he leave anything with you? A package? A message? No, Bee said, her voice remarkably steady. Should he have? Christopher stared at her, a sickeningly violent promise in his gaze. If he did, and you're holding out, your weight won't save you from a shallow grave, sweetheart. He left, the little bell above the door chiming merrily behind him. Bee locked the door immediately, her hands shaking so violently she could barely turn the deadbolt. Christopher knew. He was hunting for the letter. If he found it, Arthur would die. And if Christopher realized Bee was hiding it, she would die in agony. That night, she couldn't take it anymore. She called the private number Arthur had left on a napkin a week prior. He arrived 20 minutes later, soaked from a sudden downpour, his face tight with concern. What happened? Arthur demanded, brushing past her and scanning the dark bakery. Christopher, Bee choked out, tears finally spilling over her cheeks. He came here. He threatened me. Arthur's expression morphed into something monstrous. The mask of the gentleman vanished, revealing the ruthless apex predator beneath. He crossed the room in 2 strides, pulling Bear into his chest. She gasped, her soft, full body pressed flush against his hard, heavily muscled frame. He will never touch you, Arthur growled against her hair. I'm staying here tonight. My men are securing the perimeter. Arthur, you don't understand. Shh, upstairs, now. He escorted her to her apartment. The adrenaline of the threat, combined with the intoxicating proximity of the man she had been obsessing over, created a perfect storm. When they reached her bedroom, the power went out, a victim of the raging storm outside. Moonlight filtered through the rain-streaked window, casting shadows across her bed. Arthur didn't leave. He stood in the doorway, watching her with a raw, unprotected hunger. You're safe with me, Bee, he murmured, stepping toward her. Bee's breath hitched. She felt immense, clumsy, and vulnerable in her soft cotton nightgown. But as Arthur reached out, his hands cupping her thick waist, pulling her flush against him, every insecurity melted away. He touched her with a reverence that made her knees weak. Arthur, she breathed as his lips found her neck, his rough stubble grazing her skin. He kissed her, deep and desperate, backing her toward the edge of the bed. They fell onto the mattress together, a tangle of limbs and desperate sighs. The Mafia Boss and the baker, completely lost in each other in the dark. For an hour, there was no mob, no betrayal, no danger. just the heat of his hands tracing the curves of her hips, worshipping the fullness of her thighs, murmuring filthy, beautiful promises into her ear. When they finally collapsed, chests heaving in the cool, dark room, Bea felt a profound sense of peace. Arthur pulled her heavy body against his side, his fingers idly playing with her hair. "I'm going to kill Christopher for threatening you," Arthur whispered into the dark, his voice devoid of emotion. "Tomorrow, I'll deal with him." Bea froze. The letter. She had to give it to him now. It was the perfect moment. She shifted in his arms, turning her head to look at him. "Arthur, there's something." But before she could finish the sentence, Arthur shifted his weight to prop himself up. In doing so, he slid his hand underneath her pillow to adjust it. His fingers brushed against stiff, crinkling paper. Bea stopped breathing. Arthur's brow furrowed in the dim light. He pulled his hand back out, bringing the thick, heavy stock envelope with it. Even in the moonlight, the massive, dried bloodstain was impossible to miss. The temperature in the room plummeted to absolute 0. Arthur sat up slowly, the sheet falling away from his scarred chest. He stared at the envelope, then at his own name scrawled on the front in Joey's frantic handwriting. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, broken only by the rain lashing against the glass. Slowly, deliberately, Arthur cracked the brittle, blood-soaked seal. He pulled out the folded paper inside. His eyes scanned the lines, reading the definitive proof of Christopher's treason, the detailed plans of a hit on his own life, and Joey's final desperate confession. When Arthur finally lowered the letter, the man who had just made tender, desperate love to her was gone. In his place sat the devil of Boston. He turned his head slowly, his eyes locking onto Bea. There was no warmth left in them, only a cold, terrifying void. "How long?" Arthur asked, his voice a deadly, razor-thin whisper. "Have you had this, Beatrice?" 2 weeks, Arthur repeated, his voice echoing in the small, dark bedroom. He stood up from the mattress, completely ignoring his own nakedness as he stepped back from the bed. The letter, smeared with Joey Russo's dried, rust-colored blood, hung loosely from his grip. "You have slept in this bed, baked your pastries, and smiled at my men while hiding the exact information I have been tearing this city apart to find. Tell me why I shouldn't let my soldiers handle you right now, Beatrice." Bea pulled the floral bedsheet up to her chin, her heavy heart pounding furiously against her ribs. She felt the sudden, agonizing chill of the room, missing the heat of his large, sod body. The fairy tale was over. The monster was bare. "Because Joey told me not to trust anyone," she stammered, her voice trembling but gaining strength with every word. "He died on my kitchen floor, Arthur. His blood is still stained into the grout near the industrial oven. He told me Christopher was a rat. He told me Christopher was going to kill you. I didn't know who was loyal to you and who was loyal to him. If I handed that envelope to the wrong enforcer in your crew, I would be dead, and the letter would be burned." Arthur's jaw clenched tight. The scarred tissue along his cheek flushed a furious, dark red. "I came to your door that very night. You looked me in the eye and lied." "You are a mafia boss!" Bea yelled, finally letting the sheer terror of the past 14 days boil over into rage. "You terrify people, Arthur. You run extortion rackets. You break legs and people disappear into the Charles River because of you. Why would I trust you? I am just a fat baker trying to survive in a neighborhood you treat like a personal chessboard. I hid it because Christopher came looking for it. If he found it, I knew what would happen to me." Arthur stared at her, the cold, dead void in his eyes flickering. He looked at her soft, trembling shoulders, her full figure huddled defensively under the sheets, and the absolute defiance burning in her tear-filled eyes. He took a slow, measured breath, pinching the bridge of his nose. "You foolish, brave woman," he muttered, the deadly edge in his voice softening just a fraction. He looked down at the letter again, reading Joey's frantic scrawl. Christopher has been making back-channel deals with the remnants of the Patriarcha family out of Providence. He sold our shipping routes. He sold our docks. And tonight, Arthur's eyes widened slightly as he read the final line of the blood-stained page. "Tonight, what?" Bea asked, her knuckles turning white as she gripped the sheet. "Tonight, he intends to wipe the board clean," Arthur said, his gaze snapping toward the bedroom window. "He knows I'm here. He tracked my car." As if summoned by the devil himself, the deafening roar of automatic gunfire shattered the quiet night. The glass of Bea's bedroom window exploded inward. Shards of glass rained down like jagged diamonds across the hardwood floor. Arthur moved with terrifying speed, diving across the room and tackling Bea off the mattress. Her heavy frame hit the floor with a hard thud, Arthur's massive body covering hers completely as bullets tore through the drywall, shredding the mattress where they had just been lying seconds before. "Stay down!" Arthur roared over the deafening cacophony of breaking wood and shattering glass. Downstairs, the sound of splintering wood echoed up the stairwell. Christopher's men were breaking through the bakery's reinforced doors. The sweet, lingering scent of vanilla and rising dough was violently replaced by the acrid, choking smell of cordite and gun smoke. Arthur pulled a sleek, heavy Glock from the holster, resting on his discarded trousers. He pressed a firm hand against Bea's cheek, forcing her terrified eyes to meet his. "Listen to me, Beatrice. I need you to crawl into the hallway bathroom and lock the heavy oak door. Get in the cast-iron bathtub and keep your head down. Do you understand me?" "Arthur, they are going to kill you," she sobbed, clutching his forearm. "They can try," he smiled, a dark, terrifying smirk that sent a shiver down her spine. "I'm going to make them regret stepping foot into your bakery." He kissed her forehead, a fleeting touch of rough lips against her skin, and then he was gone, slipping out the bedroom door like a phantom into the dark hallway. Bea scrambled on her hands and knees, her soft thighs bruising against the hardwood as she desperately crawled toward the bathroom. Gunfire erupted from the stairwell. Arthur was holding the choke point. Bea heard the sickening thud of bodies falling, followed by the agonizing screams of men bleeding out among the scattered flour and sugar of her beloved kitchen. She threw herself into the ancient clawfoot bathtub, pulling a pile of thick towels over her head, praying to a god she hadn't spoken to in years. The firefight lasted for 5 agonizing minutes. It sounded like a war zone, the walls of the old building shaking with every blast. Then suddenly, there was a heavy, suffocating silence. "Arthur?" she whimpered from beneath the towels. Heavy, deliberate footsteps echoed down the hall. The bathroom doorknob turned. Bea squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for Christopher's reptilian face to appear. Instead, the door swung open to reveal Arthur. He was covered in drywall dust, and a thin stream of blood trickled down his left shoulder. But he was alive. His eyes were wild, fully engulfed in the adrenaline of the kill. "Get dressed, Beatrice," he ordered, his chest heaving. "We have to leave now. The police will be here in 3 minutes, and Christopher is still out there. The war has officially started." The safe house was a sprawling, brutalist mansion, hidden deep in the woods of western Massachusetts. It was cold, sparsely furnished, and surrounded by armed guards wielding high-powered rifles. For 3 days, Bea sat in the grand, empty living room, watching the news on a massive, flat-screen television. Boston was tearing itself apart. The media called it a turf war, but Bea knew the truth. It was a systematic, ruthless purge. Using the information from the bloodstained letter, Arthur had systematically dismantled Christopher's traitorous network. Warehouses burned in Southie. Bodies were found in the trunks of cars at Logan Airport. Arthur was exacting a terrible, bloody vengeance. Bea felt entirely out of place. She wore oversized sweatpants provided by one of the guards, her hair tied in a messy bun, her mind constantly replaying the horror of the bakery attack. She missed her ovens. She missed the simple, predictable comfort of measuring flour and sugar. She felt her scent and softness in sharp contrast to the hard, violent world she had been dragged into. On the fourth night, the heavy mahogany front door opened, and Arthur walked in. He looked exhausted. Dark circles rimmed his eyes, and he still wore the same dark suit, now wrinkled and smelling faintly of stale cigarette smoke and copper. The remaining guards in the room immediately stood at attention, nodding respectfully before silently filing out, leaving Arthur and Bea alone in the cavernous space. Arthur walked over to the leather sofa where she sat. He didn't say a word. He simply collapsed onto the cushions beside her, leaning his head back and closing his eyes. "Is it over?" Bea asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Christopher is dead," Arthur replied flatly. "I handled it personally at the docks. The Providence faction has retreated. The family is secure." Bea swallowed hard, looking at the man beside her. He was a killer. He was the devil. But he was also the man who had thrown himself over her body to take a bullet. "My bakery is destroyed," she said, a tear slipping down her cheek. "The police tape is everywhere. My life there is gone, Arthur. I have nothing left." Arthur opened his eyes and turned his head to look at her. He reached out, his large hand gently wiping the tear from her cheek. "Your bakery is currently being remodeled by the finest contractors in New England," Arthur corrected her softly. "Everything is being upgraded. Commercial ovens, imported Italian marble countertops, a state-of-the-art security system. The deed to the building has been purchased and transferred into your name." Bea stared at him in utter shock. "Arthur, I can't accept that. You don't have a choice," he insisted, his hand sliding down to cup her neck, his thumb stroking her jawline. "You saved my life, Beatrice. If you had panicked and given that letter to anyone else, Christopher would have succeeded. You were brave, and you were smart. You are the only reason I am still breathing." "But I lied to you," she whispered, leaning into his touch despite herself. "You protected yourself," he countered, shifting his weight to face her fully. His gaze dropped, taking in her full, heavy figure, tracing the curves of her breasts and the soft, wide flare of her hips under the baggy clothing. The predatory hunger returned to his eyes, burning hotter than ever. "I have spent my entire life surrounded by people who are hollow, thin, fragile, treacherous people who bend with the wind. But you are substantial, Beatrice. You are real. Every soft inch of you is genuine." He leaned in, his lips hovering mere inches from hers. "I don't want you to go back to being just a baker, Bea," Arthur murmured, his breath hot against her mouth. "I want you to be mine. I want you by my side, the queen of this city. We will rebuild your shop, but you will never be vulnerable again. No one will ever disrespect you, look down on you, or threaten you again. You have my name, my protection, and my heart." Bea looked deep into his dark, scarred face. The quiet, lonely baker from the North End was dead, buried beneath the rubble of her old kitchen alongside Joey Russo. What remained was a woman who had survived the mafia, hidden a death warrant beneath her pillow, and captured the heart of the most dangerous man in Massachusetts. She reached up, her thick, soft arms wrapping around his broad shoulders, and pulled him down into a bruising, passionate kiss. She tasted blood, danger, and an unbreakable promise. "Okay, Arthur," she whispered against his lips. "Show me how to rule." Did Beatrice make the right choice by hiding the letter? Mafia romances are full of dangerous secrets, but surviving a cartel betrayal requires more than just luck. If you loved this intense story of Arthur and Beatrice, hit that like button right now. Share this video with your fellow dark romance addicts, and do not forget to subscribe to our channel for more thrilling, pulse-pounding mafia storytelling. Ring the notification bell so you never miss a deadly plot twist today.